Hey guys, it's Robert here from Mwave and welcome back to the channel. Today we're joined by Josh from Cooler Master and he's here to talk to us about the latest technology from Cooler Master co-developed by Intel. Josh, what have you got for us?
All right, so what I've got here is the Master Liquid ML360 Sub-Zero Cooler, and it's exclusively powered by Intel Cryo-Cooling technology, a unique combination of hardware, software, and firmware designed to help unleash elite performance for gamers, overclockers, and content creators.
All right, Josh, you're getting me a little bit excited, so let's stop right there. We'll dive into the cooler stuff in just a moment, so stay tuned. Welcome back, guys. Okay, Josh, so besides having an epic name, what is Sub-Zero Cooling?
Sub-Zero Cooling is all in the name. The ability to go below 0 degrees Celsius. Now, we don't want to spend all our time there because otherwise we have potential risks with condensation and such, but it's possible, it's doable, and that's part of the power of the Intel Cryo-Cooling technology built in to the Master Liquid ML360 Sub-Zero.
And who is this product targeted for?
So this particular one here is made for the everyday user, you know, enthusiasts, super nerds, extreme overclockers, myself, included in that sort of bracket. We've been doing this sort of thing for the last 15, 20 years. And so it's about bringing that technology, that capability to the masses and essentially making it noob friendly, but not at all in any sort of derogatory manner.
Yeah, of course. So it's called the ML360 Sub-Zero Cooler, but we're not talking about the Mortal Kombat Ninja, are we?
No, sadly we're not. I'd love for him just to come through and, freeze the whole computer and get those lovely icy temperatures and go faster. But instead, no, we're talking about a all-in-one cooler.
I'm pretty sad to hear that, but how does it actually work?
Okay, so basically what we've got here is a TEC platform, a TEC, a thermoelectric cooler. Now, a thermoelectric cooler operates by having a cold plate which has current running through it, that's power, electrons, and as the power is running through the cold plate you end up with a hot side and a cool side. Now the hot side is cooled by the 360mm radiator and the pump with the water cooling system, and the cold side is attached to the CPU, hence Sub-Zero. Hey guys, so Rob's bounced. It's now time for the School of Josh, and I'm going to be going through and showing you what's needed in order to get an Intel Cryo-Cooling technology-based system up and running. There are 3 core components. First one, obviously, you need a Master Liquid ML360 Sub-Zero Cooler. And then secondly to that, you need the Intel CPU, the Intel Core i9, Core i7, Core i5, K and KF SKU CPUs. We'll be using a 10th gen. There'll also be support coming out for the upcoming 11th gen CPUs as well. And then from there, we need a suitable motherboard. So for these CPUs, you need either an Intel Z490 motherboard or an Intel Z590 motherboard. Today we're using the Aorus Z590 Master, and basically this is how it's going to go together. All right, now it's time to form like Voltron and create some awesomeness. So we're going to put this cooler aside for now, bring in the motherboard. First up, backplate. Goes on the back like so. Easy way to secure it in is just get one of the screws, grab the last 2 here. So you can see it's really like any normal all-in-one cooler that many of you may have experienced, and for those of you that haven't, you can see just how simple and straightforward it is. Tighten this up good and proper. So for those of you who haven't put a CPU in before, there's a little triangle here in the corner, and you align it with the triangle on the CPU, as we can see right here, and we then place it into the socket. There's also little notches on the side of the CPU and that align with the socket area, and the top will just pop off. Next up, we'll see this fence here. It's an airtight fence. This ensures that we have control over the atmosphere in this area here. We understand that there's a consistent dew point And that dew point can then be measured by the integrated hardware and firmware in the cooler. And that's part of what allows us to run this in such a simplified solution. So now that we've put on the bracket, it's time to put on some thermal paste. Bring this around, and you'll see that it aligns firstly with the mounting brackets, evenly tightening up each corner, not one corner at a time, because that may put too much pressure. And that is how easily you can set up a sub-ambient and even sub-zero cooler. All done. So now that we have all the hardware together, let's talk about how it's going to communicate with each other to deliver Intel Cryo-Cooling technology. So first of all, hardware is done. Next step is the firmware. So integrated into the cooler is a controller board that is connected up with a group of sensors that are constantly monitoring activity within the cooler itself. So we've got the cooler temperature, the TEC temperature and wattage usage, as well as other details like the dew point within the airtight fence. All of these details are sent through a firmware-based algorithm that are managing all of these sensory readouts to ensure that we don't have issues with things like condensation. So from there, we then have a software interface. So the software interface is operating within the operating system on your computer, so Windows. And within that space, we're then able to go in and configure what sort of operation we want out of this cooler. Now that we've formed like Voltron, we've got our awesomeness, we've spoken about the trio at play here of the hardware, firmware and software and how they all interact, and we've got super special little sensors in there and algorithms and all that nerdy jazz. Let's actually look at the practical application of it. So what we'd set up earlier on the front here to show you the ease of installation, we've actually got set up in a system here. And now we're going to look at how we can tune that system for better performance. So let's move over here. So here we have the software. First and foremost, we're using the Intel Cryo-Cooling technology software, which hides down here in the tray. And you can see in mode, we're currently in standby mode. So standby mode, it's operating just as an everyday all-in-one 360mm radiator-based cooler. And then we have the cryo mode, which has the Peltier thermoelectric cooler switching on. And then we have unregulated mode, where it runs without all the sensors to avoid condensation. So essentially you've got standby, cryo mode and party mode is what I like to call unregulated. So you can see here as well, at the moment, since it's in standby mode, it's letting us know what the dew point is in that localized environment inside the airtight fence around the CPU socket. We know how much power is being put into the thermoelectric cooler, and we know what the actual temperature of the base of the cooler is. So as a quick little example, I can put this into cryo mode, and we can watch here as the temperature starts to go down. And that's the thermoelectric cooler, the TEC, in full effect. You can also see over here the wattage being applied. So that's the amount of power being drawn. Now, if we were to go through and put it into unregulated mode, we get a warning, just letting us know that we're going into party mode and we could potentially kill stuff from condensation. That's the warning. Let's see what we're doing here. So we can see here, the temperature is starting to drop below the dew point. That's where the concern with condensation comes in. You can see it's going at full speed, currently around 160 watts of power usage, and we've actually gone sub-zero. We're now at below 0 degrees Celsius, -4, and cranking along. And that's the base of the cooler at that temperature. So we're going to go back to standby mode first. And we can also look here in hardware monitor, free to download, free to use software for hardware monitoring, as the name suggests. and you can see the temperatures, they crash down right towards 0, and now they're coming back up again. So I'm just going to reset the min-max. Now we're in quite a warm studio environment with studio lighting, so I expect the temperatures are actually going to hit what's called the TJ max, the thermal throttle. So we'll be looking, it could go as high as 100 degrees Celsius. So this is currently CPU set to stock, which means that you've got a dual core boost of 5.3 gigahertz or an all core boost of 4.9 gigahertz. So to get that up and running and see how these overclocks are effectively instigated under a heavy load, we're going to be using Cinebench R23, release 23. We're going to be looking at the multi-core benchmark. So when we hit go on this, we expect to see our CPU frequencies go up, all core. Now you'll see that they'll spike initially up around 5 to 5.1 gigahertz, but they're settling around 4.8 gigahertz. And that's because we're starting to hit thermal barriers here. So you can see the cores sitting in the mid to high 90s and even 100 degrees Celsius being hit. We've got the active temperatures right here. And we can see that in XTU, the system is thermally throttled. So what's happening there is the intelligent design of the Intel CPU is saying, hey, I've got really high frequencies and high temperatures here. I'm thermally throttling this CPU so that it doesn't have any potential to burn out. It's not going to kill itself, it's not going to hurt itself, but it does reduce performance so as to ensure to maintain that operating process. So we can see here it's run through the benchmark. Benchmark's completed. We're sitting at just over 15,000 on the score. So now we're going to switch over to cryo mode. Now we'll just clear the min-max here on hardware monitor. And you can see here with CPU-Z, a hardware diagnostic piece of software. We're using the Core i9 10th gen 10900K CPU, which is a stock 3.7 gigahertz CPU, boosting to 5.3 gigahertz on dual core and single core processors, and 4.9 gigahertz max on a multi-core platform. But we noticed that we're actually hitting around 4.8 gigahertz sustained throughout the benchmark. So now that we've got the Cryo-Cooler running, we can check here that we're just a couple of degrees above the dew point, no risk of condensation, and we're pulling around 10 watts of cooling capacity out of the TEC, bouncing up to around 20. So then let's run this benchmark again. The important detail to watch now is the core frequencies. Already we have that sustained 4.9 gigahertz across all cores, and the temperatures on the actual cooler itself is sitting in the 20s. Now that may go as high as the mid 30s or even 40s, but you can see we're not hitting a thermal throttle scenario. We are hitting maximum performance, but that's at stock. That's potentially a little bit boring. I like to overclock, I like performance. So we're just gonna let this one finish off, and we're gonna find a modest boost in performance. So we're sitting at 15,135 as the previous score, and in a moment we're going to have a refresh score. 15,737, not bad. We've gained a nice little bit of performance there, but I think we can do better. So what if we could use the ML360 Sub-Zero with Intel Cryo-Cooling technology to bring this score and these frequencies in line with the single core and dual core performance. So what we're going to do is change the multipliers on all the other cores and set them all to 23 times. To also provide a little bit of stability on that, I'm going to add a very modest 0.05 volts. So now that we've got these extra settings applied, I'm going to go Down here, make sure that we're in cryo-cooling mode, which we are, and you can see that now that the workload has finished, the temperatures have dropped once again, just a few degrees above the dew point. Let's clear the min-max temperatures again. We can see the CPU just chilling out in the high teens, low 20s. That's an amazing standby temperature if you compare it with air coolers, normal all-in-one water coolers, or even DIY water cooling. So now that we're sitting around ambient temperature, let's run this benchmark again. So now that we're running Cinebench R23 again, multi-core, we're running all cores at 5.3 gigahertz. We've gained 400 megahertz performance on every core under this scenario. And while we do start to tap on that thermal throttle again, the performance that we gain is significant. So this I purposely took towards the sort of upper echelon. This particular CPU I would rate as average in terms of the silicon lottery. Silicon lottery being a term used by enthusiasts, overclockers, on deciding the quality of the silicon. Essentially, you can imagine a bell curve on the silicon quality. You've got 20% of very poor overclockers, 60% of the meat, the average overclockers, and about another 20% of the golden samples, the cherries. So in this instance, we're just using an average out of the box chip. There was no binning or anything of that nature to try to find the best chip possible. But nonetheless, we've now seen that we've turned out a score of 16,172. That's impressive, that's not too bad. But I think we can do better. So let's play around with unregulated mode. So we get the warning, we're going into party mode. There's a risk of condensation. We're going to clear the min-max. And I'm going to clear the min-max. And I'm going to clear the min-max one more. And you'll see why, because we're going down to single-digit temperature for our CPU. That's pretty cool. There's no liquid nitrogen, no dry ice, no phase change coolers. It's effectively an all-in-one cooler. But the thermoelectric cooling capability of this and the Intel Cryo-Cooling technology software allows us to really maximize the capability of this system. So 16,172 was the previous score. We're again looking at the 5.3 gigahertz across the system, but we're able to maintain below the thermal throttle for longer until we have the performance start to regress. So what we can do next is start to decide how we can play with the core count and core frequencies. So from this point, you may start to look at, okay, could we run the two primary cores at say 5.4, 5.5, and the last four cores at 4.9, 5.1, and start to balance things out. From that scenario, you start to get into the nitty-gritty, and this is why unregulated mode is for the really hardcore enthusiasts. But you can see now we're sitting at 16,351. So comparing to an all-in-one cooler, we've actually gained about 1,200 points in the end benchmark outcome. Now for productivity, that means that you're going to render your frames quicker, you're going to have your video produced quicker, and you're going to have a more streamlined workflow. For gaming scenarios, it means more frames. It's really that simple. So now that we've gone through, had a little play with this, what I'd like to do is actually demonstrate some gaming. Now let's look at some gaming scenarios, or rather a gaming scenario. We're going to be looking at Shadow of the Tomb Raider. We're going to be running it at 1080p. Now, yeah, we've got a 3440 by 1440 ultra wide display here. However, we're going to be running it at 1080p so as to try to create a bottleneck so that the CPU has to work hard. So let's start it up via Steam. Keeping in mind, we're running the trial version because we wanted something that all of you could get your hands on and sort of compare with and have a little play with. So we're coming in with our base map where it's the dual core boost to 5.3 gigahertz and the all core boost to 4.9 gigahertz. So from here, we're just going to load into the game, go into the graphics settings, change the resolution down to 1080p, and we're going to hit go on the benchmark. All right, so here we go. We've run through now the same benchmark, this time with Intel Cryo-Cooling running, allowing us to bump all cores to 5.3 gigahertz while in a gaming scenario. So what we've achieved here in terms of actual frame per second outcomes is average frames per second has gone up by 6 frames per second, and the frames rendered, total frames rendered, has increased by 1,000. Now, to put that into perspective, yes, we're running with a very high-end system on a game that essentially just gets crushed by it. But if we're, say, running a very intensive game, such as Cyberpunk 2077, you could find that 6 frames could be the difference between being below 60 frames and being above 60 frames. Or if you're fortunate enough to be running a high refresh rate monitor, 144 frames, 160, 180 frames, 200 plus, you really want that smoothness, so every frame counts. And this is the importance of what Intel Cryo-Cooling technology and the ML360 Sub-Zero brings to you, potential end user. So let's just get a quick direct comparison. We use GeForce Experience to record both of these sessions, and we've just brought up the playback so you can see for yourself that we've got 20,129 as the total frames rendered versus 21,105. So 1,000 gained there, just shy thereof, and the 6 frames that we were talking about here in the average frames. So looking at the total frames rendered, that's a performance gain just shy of 5%. Now, if you consider how this then may be implemented as your system starts to age over the years, you can be clawing back performance and stretching out capability of your system as well. Or when it's fresh and new, just being able to hammer everything and anything that you throw at it. It's pretty darn cool.
All right, I've enrolled in the school of Josh and I'm back.
Welcome back.
Thank you so much. All right, guys, there we have it. A detailed look at the ML360 Sub-Zero Cooler. Josh, thank you so much for coming in and showing us the cooler side for the PC cooling solutions. Is there anything else we should know if you want to set up this bad boy at home?
Well, before I get to the last little info drop on everyone, I just want to say thank you very much to Mwave and also to you, Rob, for having me here to drop some knowledge bombs and share things with you. And the last little bit of detail is that we do have a qualified parts list for motherboards, power supplies, cases, and obviously also CPUs. All of those details are nicely bundled up in a list on the ML360 Sub-Zero Cooler Master product webpage. So go along to that page. It'll be linked down below in the description to check out more details. And yeah, thank you so much for having me here.
Awesome, it's our pleasure. All right, guys, I hope you're all having a wonderful day, and I'll see you all in the next video.